This is Everything Financial Radio here on the Legacy Radio Network. We are privileged to be chatting today with Mr. Jim Babka of the organization Downsize DC. Their website is downsizedc.org. I would encourage you to go check it out. Jim, in the last segment, you talked a bit about the debt ceiling. And, you know, a ceiling is defined as something that is solid. At least the ceilings in my house are solid. I can't get through the ceiling, and yet the debt ceiling seems to be a real joke. What good is a ceiling if you keep raising it every time you hit it? Can you comment?
Well, actually, I think it's a wonderful tool to illustrate what's happening. It's a moment that we all pause and reflect and realize that once again they didn't balance their budgets, they've overspent their means, and once again they're going to have to do something to secure further credit. And so it turns that into an event. And that little tiny speed bump is such a threat that you have guys like Paul Krugman already saying that it's nonsense and it needs to be thrown out. Geithner is suggesting that there should be a law to get rid of it. They don't want the debt ceiling in place anymore. They don't want even the symbolic pause and the negotiating point that it creates. Now, the Republicans have not taken advantage of it. They did, the debt ceiling debate last year. There's a lot of fanfare. They claim that they cut $30-some billion from it. It turned out they cut about $300 million. And at the end of the day, when it came time for those final cuts to be put into place, they went and cut a new deal so that they didn't have to put those cuts through. So there were no cuts delivered. But the fact of the matter was they did feel some need to pretend that they were doing something, to demonstrate to you and I that they care, that they really understand that there's a fiscal problem here. And so this is an opportunity for us. It is a ceiling. It is a place that we can rally and a place that we can fight and a place that we can bring pressure to bear to try to slow this down and maybe even reverse the course of it. One more thing. There's been lots of talk over the years, Dennis, about a balanced budget amendment. We need a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Now, I don't know how this is going to work because Congress and the President and the Supreme Court don't follow all the other amendments to the Constitution either, but nevertheless, they were going to put a balanced budget amendment. Now, the reason Republicans propose this idea is because it means that they don't have to do anything now. It's very, very hard to pass an amendment. That's much more down the road, and it gives them an excuse to say we don't have to do anything now. We need a balanced budget amendment for the future. Well, we need them to do something now, and a debt ceiling does that stuff now. We don't need a balanced budget amendment. We need to abide by our limits. If they stayed within the debt ceiling, if we could win the debate, Dennis, I'm sorry to keep going on so long, but they called this a fiscal cliff. It was more of a fiscal curb. I mean, the amount of negotiation and wiggle room they needed to keep everything running underneath the debt ceiling is of such a modest amount in relation to the overall size of the budget. But yet the President wants to scare you. He says, well, it'll affect Social Security recipients and troops out in the field. Baloney. That's the very first place they can think of to cut. Good grief, there's so many things we can think of to cut before that. So at any rate, the point is this gives us a ceiling. This is a true balanced budget tool, but at a minimum right now, even with the lame politicians we have, it's an opportunity for us to begin having a dialogue, to have a debate that we wouldn't have otherwise.
You know, Jim, I read part of an article on the air a few weeks ago, authored by former Republican Congressman and former presidential candidate Ron Paul. And I did it because I think a lot of people don't understand, how small these cuts really were that we had to avoid, this fiscal curve, as you call it, and I love the term. You know, if the mandatory cuts had taken place, defense spending would have grown by 18% instead of 20%. So only in Washington is a cut considered a slower growth in spending.
Yes.
It's crazy. Now, I want to go back and I want to change gears here a minute because your organization really is a strong advocate for individual liberties. So I'm sure you have something to say about what's going on here as far as the gun control conversation that's going on. Give us your view.
Oh my gosh! It's interesting. We belong to. We are in a system of government under a Republican form of government called the Constitution. We have a Constitution, and it says that there are limited powers that the government has. I've tried searching that document backward and forward, and I have found no authorization, particularly in Article 1, Section 8, for the Congress to legislate, for the President to issue executive orders regulating and restricting guns. And since that power isn't present in the document, he doesn't have it. But in case these guys can't understand it, there's a Second Amendment put in there that says that that we have a right to bear arms, and they're not allowed to infringe. That's it's a pretty broad term. That means not even a little bit on those rights. So it got spelled out in detail just in case there were a few dullards. And nevertheless, they still find ways to go out and do what they shouldn't be doing in the first place. If you look back at Madison's original wording, let's be very clear about what the purpose of this amendment is. He said that it was for defense. It was the defense of a country. Now, we've been in situations where we've had to fight people on their own territory who are trying to protect their own territory. We call them insurgents usually, but it's their land. And we're there, and we have a military presence, and these insurgents are able to do a lot of damage with inferior weapons, by the way, with inferior resources. They're not organized and so forth. And in some cases, they've even been able, throughout history, to drive out large, powerful militaries from their countries just by being insurgents. The number one reason for the Second Amendment was to defend the country. The second reason was to defend our liberty. And even, ask police officers, ask sheriffs, ask how many of them want to go on a gun collecting mission, go door to door to collect the guns of the American citizens. Number one, a lot of them will tell you they know it's dangerous, and they wouldn't want to get assigned to the duty. But a lot of them realize that it's the wrong thing to do. And third, for all these people that want to know whether or not semi-autos are needed for people, now just imagine that instead of just one guy coming into your house with a bat or a knife, you've got 5 guys trying to invade your house, and all of them are carrying handguns. That's when you need a semi-auto. That's the purpose of it at that moment. A shotgun, a rifle ain't going to quite do the job. That's why you would need a semi-auto. But I shouldn't have to justify my need for it. I have a God-given right that was given me to have it. I've committed no crime that should indicate I shouldn't have it. Millions of people possess these things and don't commit any crimes with it, and we are safer for it.
Jim, to shift back and maybe talk a little politics here for a minute, I read an article last week near the time of the inauguration that President Obama now has an approval rating under 50%, and only Ford and Carter had worse approval ratings. Do you see anything policy-wise to stabilize this, or do you think that he's probably going to continue to suffer from low approval ratings?
I think he's going to continue to suffer from low approval ratings. I think the country is very divided right now, pretty evenly divided. And I think that last fall we didn't have real good choices made available to us in terms of the 2 mainstream candidates. And that's increasingly been the case as the years have gone by, because the system is so rigged and is designed to deliver to us 2 pro-war statists on either side of the aisle. I think that he's going. What's interesting to me about Barack Obama's second term is that most second-term presidents are lame ducks, concerned mostly with their legacy. Their administrations are tired and exhausted. Their scandals have begun to catch up with them, but don't seem to catch up with this guy because the media is so much on his side, and more so than any president that I can recall in my lifetime. And on top of that, I don't think he's that much concerned about his legacy. I think the guy actually has an agenda and wants to get some things done. And I think he wanted to get past his second election because the most unpopular stuff he wanted to do, raise taxes on the rich, take your guns, and who knows what else, are going to be easier to do when you are not accountable to the voters or even to your party. And I think he's going to truly push things pretty hard. I think this is going to hurt the Democratic Party long term, but I'm not sure he cares. I really think he wants to try to do something on these issues, and he is the ideological extremist that he was portrayed to be by people who were concerned about his reelection.
Jim, with just the amount of frustration and people are just fed up with what's going on in Congress with both Republicans and Democrats. Do you think that the time is ripe for a third party to emerge and be viable?
Absolutely not. And the reason is that we can't come to an agreement on what that third party should look like, number one. There's lots of different people that are upset, obviously, with what's going on with Republicans and Democrats, but they don't necessarily agree on the solution. We don't have a firm moral core. Even the Tea Party itself illustrated this. The Tea Party was based on just a couple of ideas, but it very quickly got hijacked for lots of other things, and it fell apart. It didn't have a core unifying vision It was mainly an anti-Obama drive at the end of the day, and that's just not enough. That hatred of something is not enough to unify people to a common purpose. But there's a bigger problem, and that is that there have been legal hurdles placed in the way, and they're not just hurdles, they're vast, they're walls, they're huge, that have made it nearly impossible to put together that third party. They've made it hard to finance it with the campaign finance laws. That's on purpose. So it's very hard to mount the kind of opposition to the incumbent parties. They've rigged it through the debate commission. We very much think in national terms. We would need to have a candidate who was able to lead from a national level, and then he would need to have a slate of candidates who would follow him on the ballot. Putting all of that together with the current restrictions on ballot access laws and so forth has really turned this into an impossible mission. And I just have a very, very hard time seeing it come to fruition in a way that actually would matter and make a difference.
Jim, I don't know, your organization, I don't know if you actually endorse candidates, but if you look at the young group, the young group of politicians that are out there, do you see any real leader that may emerge to maybe do the right thing without regard for their political livelihood?
You know, my attention has shifted more and more towards trying to get people to understand that they are the ones that provide consent to these people who are in office, and that once people are in office, they have to be watched like a hawk. We do not endorse candidates. We're not legally allowed to, but temperamentally I don't want to either, because once you do, you're kind of in bed with those people, and you kind of have to start to make the various compromises they're making, and someone needs to hold out the principle, and someone needs to hold these people accountable. And I find it's easier to do that if I don't mix my karma too deeply with theirs. For us, the main drive as we're going forward with our new projects is really to begin to get people to understand that there's a moral principle at stake here, and that is that it's wrong for anyone. It's wrong for me, Dennis, to come and manipulate or abuse you in some way to get you to do something. Now, most people don't do that in their interpersonal relationships, otherwise they wouldn't have any friends. But we delegate this power to people we don't know, called politicians, and they do it for us. They manipulate and bully people, and that is wrong, and that needs to stop. And you see this violence on issue after issue after issue. People should be free to pursue their own happiness so long as they're not harming others. We call this the zero aggression principle, and I think we've got to get to a point where more and more and more and more people understand it, because if they do, they'll start to do lots of things in a freedom direction on issue after issue after issue, and that includes holding politicians accountable who propose bad ideas like raising taxes, spending more money, and taking your guns.
Well, Jim Babka of downsizedc.org, we're going to have to leave it there. Glad you joined us today, and hope you'll come back.
I always like being here, Dennis. Thank you.
We will return after these words. Stay with us.